Hi, welcome to a new episode in the Internet Surfer, hosting the most horror and creepiest stories from Reddit. Please don't forget to comment, like, share, and subscribe. Enjoy.
Reddit, what is your most disturbing, scary, or creepy real story? Serious. Episode 4, Horror Stories from Reddit. When I was about 13 or 14, I lived on a farm in NC. This was not the regular farm that you would expect with fields full of beans, it was a pine tree harvester. Pine needles are a big landscaping commodity, and so we lived in the woods and would bale the pine straw every year. Whatever, the point is that my house was in the middle of 550 acres of perfectly lined longleaf pines. My living room had a huge picture window. I will not go into the architecture of the house, but it was a weird custom job built by some dentist in the 30s. The window in the living room stretched the entire length of the room, 50 feet. The house was built on a subtle hill, so the living room itself sat 5 or 6 feet off the ground, so you had something of an angle to look out at a solid mile of pine trees. During the winter it was unsettling because you would get just a bit of snow, enough to reflect moonlight so that you could see the dogs running around at night. I will be honest, I hated that room and that window. So now to the relevant part. I had a cousin over for the weekend and we were doing what kids do in the country, throwing stuff in the fireplace to see what happens. It is getting late and the fire is dying down, so we build the big kingdom of couch cushions and blankets in the living room and get ready for bed. Nothing out of the ordinary until we hear the dogs barking. They were far away. The property stretches for a mile, so I just assumed they were chasing off whatever animal wanted to spoil in my yard. So, my cousin is staring out the window and not saying anything, which prompts the standard, "What's up?" He just keeps staring and says he feels like he is seeing things. Naturally, I get all anxious and start staring out the window as well. Nothing happens for a few minutes, and he gets increasingly annoyed with me because I am asking what he saw. He keeps shushing me so that he can focus. And then we both see it. The shadow of a person moves from one tree to the next. Not a run, not a leap, just a brisk walk from one tree to another. This is 100 yards out from the house. We cannot tell if the person is coming closer or not because we are dealing with moonlight reflecting off snow/slush/ice. The crazy part is that we did not so much freak out, because at this point there is still that chance that we did not see what we saw, you know? So, we just kept staring. We should have gone to wake up my dad, but he is an idiot and the kind of guy to walk out on the patio and holler into the woods with his rifle. We were simply scared enough to agree that we do not want to taunt whatever is happening. So about 3 minutes later, it happens again, but a good 50 feet from where we first saw it. Another person, another tree, a few strides, and they were gone. This happened every few minutes for the next half hour, and we just stared. At this point I should mention that I did not really have neighbors. The land surrounding our farm was federal paper, I do not know who owns it now, so it was miles and miles of uncultivated trees. You do not see people around the farm unless they intend to be there. So, we keep watching as these two figures intermittently appear and vanish until finally, we see one appear, but not disappear. Instead, we focus on it and see that it is now running forward. We lost our temper and go wake my dad. By the time we get into the room with my half-awake father, there is no one to be seen. We sprint around locking doors and windows. Keep in mind that we are out in the country with no one around. It rarely occurs to lock doors. Every door was worse than the last because you just know that as soon as you reach the door, someone is going to be trying to open it, although that never happened. We locked everything up, walked around the house at least 50 times making sure no one got in without us knowing, and then convinced my dad to fall asleep in the living room with us while we stared out the window. I never understood why my dad would not call the police. He always had this "we take care of our own" mentality, and it simply was not an option to call 911. The next day we went out to look and, absolutely, there were footprints everywhere in the snow. We saw them between trees and then we finally saw where someone had been standing right in front of the window, but as I said, I would not have seen them because while I was 7 feet up in the living room, they would have been right beneath me. We were living with my grandparents at the time. In my aunt's room was a 2-foot-tall Victorian-style doll converted into a lamp. The lamp would only turn on by holding the doll's cold plastic hand and raising and lowering the arm. The doll stood on a nightstand next to my aunt's bed, facing the door, greeting everyone who entered with a creepy dead-eye smile. I was alone in the house one day and wanted a blanket from my aunt's closet. Luckily for this scaredy cat there were 2 crucial factors that worked in my favor. 1, it was mid-afternoon and would not need the lamp's light, and 2, the closet was located immediately next to the door's entrance. So, without lifting my gaze I stared at the floor, entered the room, and turned 180 degrees. Now my back was towards the doll. I quickly swung open the closet door and reached down for a blanket when suddenly something about the room was different, brighter, the light was on, and the peach fuzz hairs on the back of my neck uncurled. I froze for an eternity, then felt my survival instinct kick in and wanted to run screaming in horror, but before all that I still had to look. Man, I wish I had not looked. As I turned to exit the room, I lifted my stupid head only to confirm that the doll's hand was raised, and that it was pointed directly at me. Such traumatizing vision burned in my brain since I was 13. Much uneasy creepy memory. A few years ago, there was a small plane accident that occurred in a neighboring town. I was part of the county volunteer search and rescue group, and when we got the call, I was one of the responders to help try and see if there was any chance of a survivor from the crash. We found out from the sheriff that was there that it was an elderly couple and their young granddaughter that were in this plane. Immediately, it went dead silent. You could see the life drain from the other responders' faces as soon as it was said. Upon getting to the area where the crash happened at, it was clear that there would be no survivors from this accident. It would not have a successful conclusion, there would be no joyful and tear-filled reunion. This plane was completely destroyed. Our lead turned to the group and said if anybody were uncomfortable or not willing to do the recovery of the bodies, there would be no hard feelings, or anything held against them. Some people just are not cut out for this. About half of the group said they wouldn't/could not do it. They helped set up the rappelling lines, made some radio calls to other teams that were lower on the hillside helping us navigate through the broken trees and aircraft parts to get to where we expected to find the bodies. I will never forget the feeling of complete, utter numbness I experienced that day. The first thing any of us saw was this small stuffed teddy bear, and the blood that had soaked onto it. When we finally were able to get down to the bodies, we had to stop and collect ourselves. It was heartbreaking to see this little girl with such empty, devoid eyes. She was gone, never to grow up and experience life like most of us had, never to know the joys, aches, frustrations, sadness, excitement, and everything else life throws at you. I have seen a lot in my few years as an EMT. I have seen drug overdoses, diabetic shock, car crashes, suicides of all manners, but this messed me up for a while. Nobody should have to go through what we went through, to help bring closure for the family. Nobody should have to deal with bringing back a child in a body bag. But if I do not stand up and do it, someone else must bear the heartache, the depression, the numbness. And I do not ever want someone else to experience it like I did. When I was a child, I lived in an old Victorian house, and I would always hear laughing while I was trying to sleep. I was an only child with a single mother, and when I was about 5 to 6, would wake up hearing laughter in the hallway in the middle of the night. After mentioning this to my mum, she swore it was just the TV being left on late. One night, I awoke hearing the laughter in my room. I went to sit up but felt like there was someone holding my shoulders down, invisible hands gripping onto my shoulders while I heard laughing. I screamed my little heart out. My mum ran into my room, flicking on the bedside lamp, convincing me it was just a dream, until I said, "But my shoulders hurt." She lifted my t-shirt and there were 2 adult-sized handprints on my shoulders. I honestly thought I had imagined it and that it had never happened, but the other day I mentioned it in passing to my mum and she went blanket white and said, "I don't want to remember that." It was around last year. We had a friend that went missing for a week. We were not that close, and he lives in a campus dorm, so I really did not know till that night. My housemate saw a report from the university's FB page that there were a couple of bodies found in a spring at the far edge of the campus. Our university is located beside a mountain. We all started to worry, especially when I learned that he really had been missing. We were anxious for news to come, and when the reports of the initial ID came in, we were shocked. He was one of them. The report misspelled his last name, but we knew it was him. Panic mode. My housemates and I went out to meet with his dorm mates, while I called a couple of our friends that went straight to the springs. They were not able to see him there, since when they got there, the police had already taken the bodies for autopsy. At that point, we could not do anything but wait for further news. It turns out that the 2 of them went swimming there the weekend before and drowned. Their bodies got really bloated from being soaked for days, and crustaceans started to eat away their skins. It really seemed at first that it was a frat initiation gone bad, because they both looked like they were covered in lashes. It is a very weird way to die. R.I.P. Kevin. I was running my cable route in the inner city. Between jobs I realized I had to leave. Now. Unfortunately, the nearest quicktrip is like 5 miles away, 3.67 light-years in city travel, so I gambled and hit the nearest gas station. I get there and of course there's a line to the one unisex bathroom. A man, a chick and I are hanging around making small talk, but mentally I am an absolute squeezing wreck. After about 5 minutes the man goes into full-on rage/panic and starts trying to rip the door open, making the most demonic screeches. The woman in the bathroom is freaking out, the chick next to me is freaking out, and just as I step in to give him a "WTF bro?" it was like he got hit with a jolt of electricity and fell. Luckily I caught him, but at this point I realized he was having a seizure. I cannot describe the feeling I felt looking into this gentleman's eyes, crying blood, extremely angry and flailing about that I was just having a conversation with. The elderly woman in the restroom happens to be a retired nurse, go figure, and promptly instructs bystanders and I how to handle the situation, and the paramedics arrive towards the end of his fit. Turns out his alcoholism was linked with his epilepsy, or some stuff, and he was waiting in line to sneak a swig of the flask in his coat pocket. Info from his wife: never would have expected it. Man seemed cool, well-dressed, and groomed, all that jazz. The ordeal ends and I tell the woman it's her turn to use the restroom, to which she declines from being freaked out. I however dropped the most contemplated and beautiful deuce in the dirtiest bathroom of the metro area. Maybe it's not that scary, but seizures scare the brother-loving stuff out of me. And I think some people's personal lives are too much for me. This is one of 2 insane instances where I happen to be in the right, wrong, place at the right time due to minor/unusual route delays. Not particularly scary, but relatively creepy. A couple of friends and I were at the annual fair held at a local park one year. Being 14-year-old girls, we thought we would be cool and separate from the large crowd at the fair by walking along a rather long walking trail that starts at the fairgrounds and travels on for a few miles. Well, it was late in the evening, and the lighting was bad. We were sitting at the mouth of a tunnel, which sat at the top of a secluded hill, when a lady with a baby approached us. She asked us if we knew a man who was standing at the bottom of the hill near a bench looking in our general direction. We told her we didn't, and her response was, "Well, he's been following you for a while. I don't know what he's up to, but you should be careful." Needless to say, we hightailed it back to the fair. About 4 years ago, I woke up one late morning on a day off at 10:21. You'll learn why I remember this 4 years later in a second. I got out of bed, used the restroom, got dressed, etc. I went back into my room and picked up my phone to check for messages, and the clock on the phone said 10:25. I was surprised, because I knew that it did not take me only 4 minutes to dress. I'd lingered in the warm bathroom quite a while and brushed my teeth too, etc. I looked at my bedroom alarm clock to confirm, since that was the clock I'd looked at when I woke up. It also said 10:25. I shrugged it off and figured in my sleepy, just woke up state, I'd misread the original 10:21. I went downstairs, turned on the PC, turned on the news on the TV to listen to, and started cooking breakfast. I wanted microwave up some rice leftovers from last night, so I went to pop them in the microwave. The time on the microwave was 10:25. I whipped out my phone to check the time, it still said 10:25. There was no way. There was no way that I checked the clock upstairs, walked downstairs, turned on the PC and the TV, got a glass of water, and started cooking eggs in the matter of less than a minute. I decided to stand there and watch the microwave clock while counting to 60. I figured if it didn't turn to 10:26 in 60 seconds of less, clearly it was malfunctioning. It turned to 10:26, about 20 seconds into my count, which made sense. It had been 10:25 for a while before I looked. I finished making my breakfast, plated it up, and took it over to the PC like the lonely slob I am. The time on the PC said 10:20. I pulled out my phone. My phone also said 10:20. That's when I started writing all this down. I pulled up the little clock toolbar and watched the second hand go around. While I watched it, time seemed to pass normally. It ticked to 10:21 and 10:22 as I watched the second hand go around. Over the next what felt like an hour or so, maybe an hour and a half, all the clocks in my house, as well as internet ones, seemed to pass time normally while I observed them. But if I looked away for a while, at least 2 minutes or so, they'd make no sense. At one point about 15 minutes after these events, the cell phone and PC read 10:14. Then later, 10:13. Then back into the 10:20s. After an hour/hour and a half, they normalized, and I've never experienced it since. When I was a kid, I had to go to sleep early at about 8 p.m. I was lying in my bed staring at the hallway lights listening to my family laugh in the kitchen. I was squinting my eyes to see how long I could make the light rays extend out. Then there appeared an old translucent lady with long curly yellow hair, and she wore a purple flower dress. She stared at me with a smile half the size of her face. I kid you not. I tried to scream but nothing came out. So, I placed the blanket over my head, and cried myself to sleep. The next morning, I asked my sister if we had a visitor the night before. My words probably were, "Did an old white lady visit us last night?" She said no. I told her what I had seen, and she said it probably was my guardian angel. Thinking of it now, I have to say, bullshit. That's some freaky way to say hello. My classmate later mentioned to his friends he saw a teenage boy with the same half the size of his face smile, standing at night in his backyard as he was going to close the garage door. His reaction was to run back into the house. A friend of mine is the type who always has wacky adventures and funny stories to tell. I swear, half the reason I keep her in my life is for the entertainment value of the crazy stuff that happens to her. But this one wasn't funny. When she was about 20, she was leaving a bar one night, legal age here is 19, and as she was saying goodbyes to her friends, a fight broke out between a couple of other guys nearby. It was brief, basically, one of them shouted at the other for estimating his woman or some BS, then just pulls a knife, stabs him right in the gut, and bolts. This was not an unsure neighborhood or anything. It was about as unexpected as if someone had pulled a knife in a mall food court. My friend has fortunately had some first aid training, but she's never actually had to use them before. Somehow her instincts kick in, she staunches the wound, is keeping him conscious and aware, enlists someone to call 911, all that jazz. Tended to him for nearly 20 minutes, though she lost all concept of time. When the paramedics came, she just stood up and walked off to sit down on a nearby bench, covered in a stranger's blood. She had gone into shock and didn't move from that spot for a good half hour. Fortunately, the paramedics were smart enough to realize that they should take care of her, too, so once they got the guy stable and into the ambulance, they gave her a blanket and talked to her a bit to make sure she was going to be all right and that she had friends who would make sure she got home. So, it all turned out okay. But it's still the most WTF horrifying story that's ever happened to someone I know personally. I was living in this apartment in Oslo that just had this weird vibe. There were 3 of us living there, 2 girls and me. This was a building from the mid-1800s. Several weird things happened there. One of the rooms I didn't want to even go in. It was cold, even if the rest of the place was perfectly warm. Every time I was in there, thoughts of children crying or being in some kind of peril went through my head. I can't explain any better. I could not stay in there for exceptionally long. My room was the old living room, and one morning I awoke to something growling like a big cat or snarling dog in my room. I was pinned down in my bed, although nothing was there. I could not move. I was scared. One of the girls I lived with had a cat, and even though it was only a year old, it just suddenly died. We were just hanging out, and all of a sudden we heard the cat making these horrible sounds. It was just lying in the bathroom on the floor, tongue out, gasping for air and making this horrible sound. Then it died. It took like 10 minutes. I moved out of that place shortly after. I am an excessively big skeptic, I don't believe in ghosts etc., but that place was really unnerving. When I was 18, my grandfather was having heart problems. I would wake up every morning and go to his house to see him. I would just talk to him, help him around the house and watch TV with him. He has been really lonely since my grandmother died 3 months ago. I will never forget this moment. It was June 7th when I arrived at his house and my grandfather had the biggest smile on his face. I was so happy to see him smiling. He looks at me and says, "Guess what? I'm going to go see my wife in 2 days." At the moment, I thought my grandpa lost it. Unbelievably, my grandfather died 2 days later in his sleep. The thought of it is scary, creepy, and disturbing. It is like he knew he was going to die in 2 days. On a side note, the last 2 days he was alive he was smiling and peaceful. I can't explain it, it felt like he knew something we don't know. This is from the very first comment I made on Reddit. It was pretty creepy and somewhat disturbing. When I was 15 or 16, my 3 or 4-year-old sister drank some green nail polish remover she got from the bathroom sink. It looked like mouthwash. We guessed she was imitating our parents. Our neighborhood pharmacy had an assistant rush over some Ipecac and something else, Maalox maybe, IDK. While we were waiting, she was on the bathroom floor in pain when she told us, "I drank some green stuff and died one time. My husband ran off with a girl and I got sad and drank some green stuff and died. My girls were crying and sad when I died. We were freaked. My sister is fine." 14. I used to work as a cleaner at my school after class, so by the time I left, the roads were pretty quiet as everyone had already walked home. One day I noticed this man walking behind me, not too close but obviously following me. He was quite creepy, his face looked like it was made of plastic, and he had a really subtle smile. Anyway, the first time I saw him I thought nothing of it. About 2 weeks later I noticed him again, and from then on I saw him every single day when I was walking home. I didn't tell anyone because I was 16 and I knew my parents would want to start taking me to and from school, and that's not cool. Anyway, one weekend I was walking to my friend's house, which was a similar route to the one I would take to school. As I was turning up the main road that he would follow me back from school on, I happened to look over at a minibus that was parked at the bottom on the road, and I swear to God, he was sat in the driver's seat, staring through the windows at me. I called my friend and made it very obvious that I was on the phone thinking it might deter him, but when I next turned around he was about 2 meters behind me, with that same plastic smile. I started to sort of walk/run and I could actually hear him doing the same, keeping the same pace and distance the whole time. I was still on the phone to my friend, and I told her to open her front door and wait for me. When I got there I ran straight in, and we locked up the door. The guy just stood outside her house for about 2 hours, smiling and staring at the window. After that I never saw him again and I've moved away since, but when I went back to visit my parents last weekend, that minibus was still there parked in the exact same spot. I used to work as a cleaner at my school after class, so by the time I left, the roads were pretty quiet as everyone had already walked home. One day I noticed this man walking behind me, not too close but obviously following me. He was quite creepy, his face looked like it was made of plastic, and he had a really subtle smile. Anyway, the first time I saw him I thought nothing of it. About 2 weeks later I noticed him again, and from then on I saw him every single day when I was walking home. I didn't tell anyone because I was 16 and I knew my parents would want to start taking me to and from school, and that's not cool. Anyway, one weekend I was walking to my friend's house, which was a similar route to the one I would take to school. As I was turning up the main road that he would follow me back from school on, I happened to look over at a minibus that was parked at the bottom on the road, and I swear to God, he was sat in the driver's seat, staring through the windows at me. I called my friend and made it very obvious that I was on the phone thinking it might deter him, but when I next turned around he was about 2 meters behind me, with that same plastic smile. I started to sort of walk/run and I could actually hear him doing the same, keeping the same pace and distance the whole time. I was still on the phone to my friend, and I told her to open her front door and wait for me. When I got there I ran straight in, and we locked up the door. The guy just stood outside her house for about 2 hours, smiling and staring at the window. After that I never saw him again and I've moved away since, but when I went back to visit my parents last weekend, that minibus was still there parked in the exact same spot. When I was in high school I had a class in what was known as the Orange Hall. Every day in that class I would be annoyed hear someone whistling the song Pop Goes the Weasel, but really slowly. 2 years later when I had a class in the same hall I heard it again, nearly every day. Now my sister is in high school, and her friend said something about someone whistling the song. I found this strange because my sister is so much younger than me. There is no way the same annoying student was still there doing this every day. She said she asked her teacher about it and the teacher said that happens every day around the same time. It's been happening for 10 years, and they've never been able to find anyone whistling in the halls.
Thanks for watching. Please comment, like, share and subscribe. The Internet Surfer on YouTube for more horror and scary stories.